the British Isles are in the collapse stage. There's no more that can be taken from the Commonwealth because members of the Commonwealth can align through the Belt and Road with China or with the Eurasian north, south, and east, west corridors and be protected by China and Russia. And so they have an alternative to the need for the security from Britain, which really has been security from the United States since the late 1800s, early 1900s. So Britain's in the collapse phase. The United States is not quite in the collapse phase. As they are collapsing the system as they steal absolutely everything they can on their way out before the lights go out.
And that's evident from the tax policy
Yes.
in the United Kingdom, and also bringing in central bank digital currencies.
Yes. Well,
which would have the effect of wiping out people's wealth completely.
Well, that's the great taking.
What do you mean by the financial kill chain?
It's a 7-step process that's, been heavily refined over the last 400 years since the Peace of Westphalia in Europe and the Inglorious Revolution in what would become the United Kingdom in 1688. It's a formal structural process whereby nation states, which were created in those processes in the 1600s, are set up to be to enslave people to wages, taxes, and debt, such that the people build up assets. And then when those countries' assets are ready to be harvested, to create cost, conflict, and chaos, and collapse that country to either outright steal or buy up the assets of that company on the cheap to re-collateralize continental Europe's banking system.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
The Keystone wallet is the wallet that you want to be using to keep your crypto safe. Whether you are a Bitcoin maxi or an altcoin lover, it is perfect for you. Easy to use, 3 secure elements, and integrates easily with MetaMask, Kepler, and dozens of other extension wallets. Get one now to keep your crypto safe and secure. Go to bit.ly/CryptoRichKeystone. This is an audio recording of an X Space courtesy of thecoinrepublic.com, the go-to place where you can keep up to date with what's happening in the crypto space. Welcome. This is Crypto Rich. I am hosting this X Space on the financial kill chain with my guest E.M. Burlingame. Today we're going to be talking about how nation states weaponize money in order to exert control over other nations. Now, what has that got to do with crypto? Well, crypto, particularly Bitcoin, I consider to be a form of money, a new kind of money that's going to be displacing the fiat currencies and the role that they've been playing in robbing ordinary people of their labor. But also, I want to let you know that please do not take anything that I say on any X Space or any video that I ever do or any audio you ever hear from me as financial advice. This is purely for educational and entertainment purposes only. And the same goes for any vlogger or blogger that you read or listen to on the internet. Don't take your financial advice from them. Do your own due diligence. And you can find me, Crypto Rich, on YouTube, although I'd much prefer it if you went to ODYSEE and Rumble and 3Speak, since they are censorship resistant. I'm also on BitChute, but the British government has decided that BitChute is far too risque and dangerous for people in Britain, in which case you'll need to use a VPN to follow my work on BitChute. Hi, just a quick note to let you know that during the live recording of this X Space, there were some technical difficulties and some signal dropouts. But otherwise, it was a great conversation.
Sure. Early stint in the Army, then tech in Silicon Valley, built a couple tech companies, fintech company, one of the first online consumer credit companies, algorithm driven back in the 90s, then telecom tech, went to China for a few years as a private equity investment banking analyst, mostly in telecommunications, digital media, etc., some large scale infrastructure projects. Decided to take a year in Europe and as a CFO of a yacht builder and learned a lot about the hoity-toity in Europe, shall we say. And then went back in special forces, did 11 years in special operations, did my doctoral studies in computational science and engineering. And now I mostly work in the medical industry, trying to see how we can evolve that. Because as we're waiting for Rich a little bit. Yeah. As we're waiting for Rich, I guess I'll give a little more detail. I built a couple of boutique investment banks participated in that. I was in algorithmic high frequency trading for a while. So I've had a substantive background in capital and finance, from angel seed investing to VC to private equity, investment banking, algorithmic high frequency trading, etc. We were looking to launch one of our own tokens for a crypto-based investment platform back in 2018, but on advice of counsel, we stepped away from that. So that's pretty much my experience in a nutshell now. Indeed.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Ian. That has never happened before, that I've dropped out, I think, and nobody can hear me. I don't know what you heard or didn't hear. All right. So, Ian, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the Coin Republic Tech for carrying this while I was here. I'm going to carry on, right? And I know you've introduced yourself, and I did say that you've been on my channel a couple of times, not enough times, and hopefully you'll be on my channel more often. And I appreciate you doing this with me. And you published a blog post on your Substack, which people can find through his X profile, on the financial kill chain.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to know what that is, and like from a beginner's point of view, many of the people here will be Bitcoin journey. So if you please bear that in mind, what do you mean by the financial kill chain?
It's a 7-step process that's been heavily refined over the last 400 years, since the Peace of Westphalia in Europe and the Inglorious Revolution in what would become the United Kingdom in 1688. It's a formal structural process whereby nation states, which were created in those processes in the 1600s, are set up to be to enslave people to wages, taxes, and debt, such that the people build up assets, and then when those countries' assets are ready to be harvested, to create conflict and chaos and collapse that country, to either outright steal or buy up the assets of that company on the cheap to re-collateralize continental Europe's banking system.
Right. Okay. There's a lot in there. And one of the things I said to you when we first spoke is, why couldn't history be this interesting when I was at school, right? And I think they deliberately make it boring so we don't find out, what's really, really going on. I want to start, if you can, just in a nutshell, because there's so much. And I know from talking to you, right, you have a considerable amount of knowledge about the history that shaped current events. So the Treaty of Westphalia.
2 treaties.
Let's start with that. Okay.
2 treaties, Innsbruck and Munster, 1645, 1649. Those 2 treaties collectively, in the 5-year period roughly between them, is called the Peace of Westphalia. It was what the 30s, 50, and 80 years wars culminated in, all of which were artificially conflated wars, designed specifically to bankrupt and bring down feudalism and monarchy, to discredit it in nonstop war. And what it put in place was the rule of law, the quote-unquote rules-based system, right? Everybody hears about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
It was to put in the rules-based system and to establish certain principalities as states, as nation states, as defined by law, with certain legal powers authorized within the legal use of violence or force within their borders and between states, but in accordance with international law, and the control of their exchequer, which we would consider to be the central bank treasury, right, or treasury and central bank later. What it did is it virtualized warfare, perpetual warfare, from the battlefields of Europe to banking and finance and business.
Wow. Okay. There's something, I think, from what you've said. So prior to that, we'd have regions, areas controlled by different monarchs.
Mm-hmm. Or
making up their own rules. Making up their own rules, depending upon their own personal whims. And then with a rules-based order, then you have the possibility of transnational governance,
yes,
national governance, And then all you need to do is to change the rules.
Well, first you have transnational banking, and that provides well, one, it embeds the kill chain in all these principalities and states, etc. But first you have international banking, finance, and business, and that's the first major international superstructure, which then ultimately leads to Brussels, the EU, etc., and this whole push to end nation states. That's been the whole centerpiece of the Davonian world, Davos. So ultimately, the direct path from Peace of Westphalia is what gets us to the globalist, excuse me, and globalist agenda, which is total and absolute control by banks and oligarchs, right? Merchant princes, as we say. And it's been rather successful for 340 years. All the hereditary princes have, for all intents and purposes, been shoved aside or discredited or destroyed, outright destroyed. And now there's nothing between the Westphalian model and the people. There's nothing, no shield, right? Which is love them or leave them, but that's what the princes were. The princes were a shield between malevolent usury and enslavement and the people. And maybe what we should do is do the 7 steps of the kill chain.
Sure.
And then we can take it from there. And then we'll get to some of the question about how do we counter it, right? Well, how do we counter it is we need to know how it mechanistically works structurally, and how it plays out in each country, state, principality, etc. is somewhat different, but the principles and the mechanisms stay the same. So the first step is infiltration and influence. The financialists embed themselves in a country's leadership, posing as advisors or allies. The second step is debt entrapment. They push unsustainable loans, locking nations into repayment cycles. Now, the second piece of that I've really worked on here recently is not just debt entrapment, but they do the debt entrapment while also grossly undervaluing the resources and assets of that country so that they can come in and buy them rather at a lower price point than they should, whereby less funds flow through to the local country or community. In the process of doing the debt entrapment and looking at collateral for foreign loans, they do asset identification, which allows them to go in and look at the value of resources, land, industry, tax spaces, and infrastructure, all of which they codify, identify either as current collateral for current debt or later collateral for later debt. Once the system is built up sufficiently in a country, they begin economic destabilization, where they use capital markets, bond markets, violence, political crisis, etc., and they begin to manipulate the markets to deepen the crisis, putting people into hardship where they're ready to fight. And then they come in and help solve the problem with debt for asset swaps, where the assets are seized in exchange for debt relief. In addition, and this is once the crisis phase, the crisis that they've created has reached a sufficiency that at least the elites are willing to sell off some assets to calm things down or to have a way to get out of the country. And sometimes assets are just seized completely, but that uses foreign paramilitary groups, uses been using the British Empire, I hate that term, but it used the Brits for 300 years to do it, and it used the Americans for the last 100 years to do the asset seizures, through the form of wars, covert wars, clandestine wars, et cetera, et cetera. And then they extract and exploit. So they take as much of the wealth as they can, they take as many of the assets as they can, they work the people as much as they can, they get as much out of the labor of the people as they can in the form of debt, nation-state debt, which has to be paid for by the taxes of the people of that land, sometimes for 4 or 5 generations to come. Once that's all gotten to where there just isn't anything more to be taken, and you can't use violence or chaos or just manipulation to take any more, well, now you have to collapse the country, the state, the economy, and abandon it, leave it to its own devices. So the nation is left broken, its rich is gone, its people indebted, total chaos, conflict for generations to come. And usually this abandonment collapse cycle can happen as quick as 10 years, but on the collapse sides, it can take up to 80 years for the state to recover, if it ever recovers at all.
Wow. Okay, and I can see where that has been in play, I suppose, in the last couple of years. But do you want to give us some examples of where the entire process has been followed through?
Russia. They set up Russia in World War I. Well, they indebted the Tsar and the Tsarist Russia in the late 1800s as Russia was trying to build out and modernize. They increased a whole bunch of the violence and the chaos and the conflicts. And then in World War I, the British, again, I hate that term, that's the freaking Dutch, really. But the continental Europeans, through the quote unquote the British Empire, set the Russians up so that they were smashed in World War I, and then with promises made, etc., and they weakened His Royal Highness Tsar Nicholas II, his reign, and then outright betrayed him and his entire family, and they collapsed Russia into a civil war, the Red-White War. And the Red-White War went on for about 20 years. However, what came out of it was not what they were expecting. They were expecting although they didn't care which one it went, but they were expecting more of the republicanism, liberal democratic folks to win, and that's not who won. Who won were the communists, the Marxists. But they didn't care that the Marxists won, because the Marxists would solve another problem, and the Marxists would work for the next 70 plus years to eradicate Russian civilization. Because once you've done this to a country, once you've done the collapse and abandonment, you don't want them ever to be able to rise again and come back and get recompense for what you've done to them. So you must destroy them. If they're a smaller or moderate nation, non-civilizational people, well, no matter, you don't have to worry about them. But if they are civilizational people, you have to worry about that. You have to worry that those people are going to come back, they're going to survive, they're going to regroup, they're going to remember what you did to them, and they're going to come after you. So they were quite all right with the Soviets killing 70 million of their own people, maybe 100 million of their own people, because that was an attempt to eradicate the Russian civilization. It didn't work. That collapsed, the Marxists collapsed, and so then the very same folks that had brought about the initial collapse of Tsarist Russia flooded back in the 90s, early 90s, into the 2000s, and with debt swaps and sophisticated financial stuff, stole all of the assets, by setting up local oligarchs. So that's one. China's another. China, it's been done to twice, in the late 1800s, and then again in the 1940s, the Opium Wars, and then the betraying of the Kuomintang, the KMT, and support for the Marxists for the very same reason. They wanted to wipe out the Chinese civilization so it didn't ever come back, to repay the West, particularly continental European banks through the City of London, for what they had done. And then there's all number of other examples of other countries we've done it to in South and Central America and all around the world, really.
Okay, I can think of a couple of other examples that I think may fit. One wasn't successful, and the other one I think is still in play. So one is the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then when Gorbachev handed over to
that's
Putin.
Right. Yeah, I articulated that one already. Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry, I missed that bit.
Yeah. Now it did fail ultimately because Putin Putin was elevated. He didn't hardman himself up. So that one did fail, and China ultimately failed as well, because in 2010, 2012, but beginning in about 2010, they were elevating Xi up to one. They were not able successfully with communism, with Marxism, to erase those two civilizations. And so the civilizations are resurgent now.
Right.
Which is why this all-out push to destroy Russia and the all-out push to destroy China. They broke free. And Persia the same. Unfortunately, Persia's another civilizational people. And there's been some interesting comments about the mullahs, and I can't say this is not my area of the region's not my area of expertise, but that the mullahs were actually sent in there to Arabize the Persian peoples such that it would have the same effect as communism was supposed to have in Russia and China, of wiping out Persian culture and society, setting them up for, an ultimate collapse, which seems to be what they're trying for now, such that, these Western banks can flow in and steal the assets cheap and then abandon the Persian people, etc.
Right, okay. And then who sent the mullahs, if what you're saying is accurate, if your assertion is accurate, who sent the mullahs in?
The British.
MI6?
The bloody British. MI6. Yeah. MI6, which, we look at MI6, CIA, Mossad, German intelligence under Galen, all of that, it's all one entity. And this is the Praetorians. This is, quite literally the Praetorian Guard that goes back. The Praetorians of these ancient Venetian banking systems become Amsterdam, become City of London, become Wall Street banking systems. And the intelligence community, quote unquote, intelligence community is merely the Praetorian Guard of ancient Rome.
Right. Okay. Because I do remember the 1979 coup of the Shah, and I also get what you're saying in terms of the Arabization, because it was such a change from how Persia was before.
Oh yeah.
I mean, more like, some of the more Wahhabism, almost a Shia version of Wahhabism, which is prevalent in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the other place where I can see that it is happening, that I think is happening, is with the Great Reset.
Yes. Yes.
You have. Do you want to comment on that and say where you think we're at with that?
It's splendid. I mean, you're exactly right. What is the Great Reset, the Great Taking, right? All of that. Now that they, increasingly over the last 20 years, they realized they weren't going to be able to cannibalize Russia and get all those, tens of trillions of dollars, if not $100 trillion in baseline resources, which is quadrillions when you get it all in your financial system over 40 years. Nor were they going to be able to take and cannibalize China and its manufacturing and et cetera, et cetera. So where do you go next? Where has the resources sufficient to recapitalize your system that's now 340 years bankrupt, right? A 340-year Ponzi scheme takes a substantive amount of assets to recapitalize. Well, the only place that has that capital is Europe, the assets, although those are getting wiped out now rapidly as they're deindustrialized, etc. But it's been the British Empire, which has been gutted for 340 years, and the United States. These are continental Europeans. Yes, they work through the City of London, but that's been occupied territory since, 1688. The only place in the world that has sufficient capital and collateral assets for the, steps 6 and 7 of the financialist kill chain is what's left of the British Empire and the United States. Canada, of course, on the natural resources side, the raw material side, but that only matter, natural resources and raw materials only matter if you have manufacturing, and Europe doesn't anymore.
No. Okay, so I can see the infiltration and influence by Klaus Schwab, the debt entrapment and undervaluing the resources of the country.
Yeah.
Well, the UK and European Union have been running up debt for years.
Oh, look at the US.
Asset identification.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry,
and the US, yeah. So there is strip mining going on, certainly of Europe and the UK.
Yes.
And definite economic destabilization by, for example, the sanctions against Russia, but also some of the policies of lockdown.
Well,
and in Britain, subsequent policies where they're creating taxes in such a way in order to destroy small businesses.
Well, they're trying to, sadly, and breaks my heart, being of English and Scottish direct descent, Britain, the British Isles, are in the collapse stage. And
really,
it's there, and there's no more that can be taken from the Commonwealth, because members of the Commonwealth can align through the Belt and Road with China or with the Eurasian north-south and east-west corridors and be protected by China and Russia. And so they have an alternative to the need for the security from, Britain, which really has been security from the United States since the late 1800s, early 1900s. So Britain's in the collapse phase. The United States is not quite in the collapse phase. But what happens as they are collapsing the system is they steal absolutely everything they can on their way out before the lights go out. Right down to the bolts in your chair.
Yeah. And that's evident from the tax policy
Yes.
in the United Kingdom, and also bringing in central bank digital currencies.
Yes. Well,
which would have the effect of wiping out people's wealth
absolutely
completely.
Well, that's the great taking. The other piece is they're flooding the country with millions of people that should never be there because they'll never acculturate. That's another way of wiping out a civilizational people, so that those civilizational people don't come back one day and kill you for what you've done to them.
Yep. And you and I, we have talked on a video, which I've not yet posted. No, I have posted this about what's happening in Ireland. And for people who don't know, Ireland has a population now where about 20% of the population in the last few years has become Muslim, mostly Muslim migrant men, military-age men, and what was once formerly pretty much 99% white, homogenous Roman Catholic nation. And all of a sudden rapid influx of so many people from an alien culture.
Well,
and I say that as a Muslim because I'm from Pakistan. I wouldn't want all of a sudden, in a matter of a few years, 20% of Pakistan's culture to be from Pakistan's population to be from some other nation with other languages, other religions, because that would just destroy.
Well, let's take it another piece. These aren't the best and brightest from where they come from. Those get to come here legally. This is the detritus of the lands where they come from. That's the other piece of the collapse, right? So one, they have to try and wipe out your civilization and your culture so that you can't stand and fight. Two, you have to stand and fight at home just to survive. And they flood you with incompetence at every level that's never going to be competent. I mean, with some minuscule exceptions here and there. And now you don't have the competence to run your sophisticated society and system. That's
okay. All right. So then how do you see this playing out in the major power blocks in Russia, Europe, the United Kingdom? Because that's a little bit separate from Europe.
Yeah.
United States, Canada.
So
China,
yeah. So Russia and China have said, and forget my language rule, but Russia and China said, yeah, you all can fuck off. We're not doing this. You did this to us. You tried it. You did it once with Russia, tried it a second time, failed. You've done it twice with China. Now you tried it a third time and failed. So they're like, no. Persia has also said, coming to the end of whatever the hell they're going through, and they're saying no. They're not necessarily playing it right because there's, I don't know exactly what's going on there, and I haven't really paid a lot of attention until all the things that's been going on recently. In the United States, there's a color revolution going on right now. A palace coup and a color revolution to try and diminish and discredit Trump and tear his base apart and all of that. Will it succeed or not? I don't know. So far, they're playing it right. I'll get to the, beloved British Isles here in a moment, but in the Commonwealth, but I don't think it's going to succeed here in the United States, at least not yet, right? Not as of now. Because the United States has elevated somebody like Putin and Xi, although in the more English way that he has to be. And everybody's screaming about how uncouth and uncivilized, etc. Donald Trump is. Well, he's actually English, because English, at the core of English civilization is we're a bunch of pub brawlers by our very nature. I mean that quite honestly, right?
No, listen, I just love talking to you. You're absolutely right, because the thought I had is, well, those pub brawlers, they evolved into England's fine tradition of football hooligans.
Yes. But where did they come from? They came from the Vikings who settled in the lands, and the Anglo-Saxons. They're all warrior peoples, right? The British Isles have never been estrogen-rich, civilized peoples. We've been testosterone-rich, warring people since our very beginning. And that's where, the pub brawlers came from. Even our princes and kings were pub brawlers, right? And so, to expect that, the American president who's going to fight back and push back against all of this is going to be some estrogen-rich, consensus-driven person is ludicrous. That's not English at all. And if we're going to survive, as you and I have spoken before, we have to remember that we're English, we're a civilization, and we're worth fighting for. And so I think they're going to fail here, because what they're not understanding is that his uncouth, rough demeanor is won him over probably, honestly, 80% of the population, even if only 60% of them say it publicly. Why? Because down underneath, we English peoples, and again, that's not an ethnic thing, right? It's a cultural, civilizational thing. But down underneath, by our nature, we are pub brawlers.
Yeah. And just to back up the point or elaborate a bit on because we have a fair number of Indian people, because the Coin Republic I think it operates out of Dubai and was born in India.
Wonderful.
And I'm Pakistani, and by English, you're meaning in a much, much larger context, so not people who are white Anglo-Saxon from this part of the world where I reside, but people who are the cultural inheritors of English common law tradition.
Yes.
And what was it you said when we spoke the other day? Sovereignty?
So three fundamental principles. Well, two principles and then one structural thing that has to be to keep the two principles. One, individual responsibility, right? Or individual sovereignty, but I like to add the word responsible individual sovereignty, because I know a whole bunch of retards running around going, I'm sovereign, but they're not responsible at all. It's like, okay, sit down, shut up, you don't get a say. If you're responsibly individually sovereign, you get a say. But that's primary in English civilization. The second principle is the right to private property, because you can't be individually sovereign or even responsible if you don't have the right to yourself as property. The first private property is your thoughts, your emotions, your labor, et cetera, et cetera. In order for those two principles, which are the core fundamental principles of the English civilization laid down over 1,200 years ago, is a structural form that was played down by a king, as identified by his grandfather, and then finally instantiated by his grandson, of a balance of power between princes, people, princes being the oligarchs, the ultra high net worth, very capable people, and the people, and what we call parliament now, but really, the king / government, because even in monarchical days, the king was still only the executive of the court, right, of government.
Right.
So those are the three structures of what it means to be English. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, anybody who adhered to those three legitimately is English.
Right.
And with respect to, greater India, including Pakistan and Bangladesh, well, not only are there many of your peoples that adhere to those principles, but you've adhered to them for 300, 400 years, and you've grown up with us. And we're all the same, the same house, the same family.
Okay, so that's to clarify it for
we've all been in the same pub brawls.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, then you were asked, I think, while I was off, what can we do to stop it?
Yeah. Well, one, again, understand what they're doing, right? Understand that everything that we're seeing, all the noise, all the distraction, all of the this and that, the conflict, et cetera, that it's all they're following their stepped process. And when we look at something that's happening in our own community or somewhere in the world, we can look at it with this step process and go, oh, okay, well, they're operating on step 6 right now. And what can I do, to counter this step 6? Well, one, everything happens at the local and small level, so be involved locally, right? They want us paying attention to all these big national, international things, because then we're not paying attention to what they're doing right in our own community to steal our own things, to set us up for kill chain, execution steps. So be involved locally. See who's, see the puppets they put in positions of power and influence in your local communities and counter that. The second piece is don't hate who they tell you to hate. Because the way in, these financialists are estrogen driven. They estrogen-based warfare. And I call them estrogens in some cases. And that doesn't mean they're women. It just means that they're elevated levels of estrogen. And from neuroscience, we know estrogen drives conflict, war fighting, all that kind of stuff in a very, very different way than testosterone. So you have to understand not only that they're following a 7-step process, but they're engaged in a very specific type of warfare. It's an estrogen, passive-aggressive kind of, always plausible, deniable kind of warfare. And it's rather genocidal. It actually does hate you, although it'll tell you it loves you and cares about you, etc. Right? And then the other final piece is we have to stop falling for their lie of down with princes, because it was only the princes who stood between us and them. Now, I don't know that we have many princes worthy of such a thing anymore. Some, right?
Yeah, but you got to watch out whether they're actually captured or
Yeah, well,
in some.
many are, and particularly there in the UK, unfortunately, because the ones that
Yeah.
weren't got destroyed in wars or with taxation that highly targeted them and their family and their assets. Nobody's paid. Well, I wouldn't want to say that. 70 million Russians died, 200 million Chinese died. How many other hundreds of millions of people have been killed by their own governments around the world by this? So I wouldn't want to say that, the British Isles have got the worst of it. They are certainly getting it now, being set up for, 70-year collapse, 80-year collapse. But, the nobility, the nobility in the world that got the worst. And, oh, by the way, the French Revolution was the same thing. Same people, same thing, down with princes, right? The people that I think have been damaged the worst are the English, in that this all happened before there was a really strong sense of English civilization. And so it's, they got in their exact right time, the 1600s, started in the 1620s with the, the fight against King Charles I, and then the English Civil War, which they funded and backed as well. And, and then, the English-speaking peoples have been enslaved thoroughly for 340 years. The Russians only had to deal with these people for 80 years. Chinese for 120 years. The English-speaking peoples are still dealing with them to this day, and that's 340 some odd years on.
Okay, and then 340 going back to 1688, around about that time.
Yeah, 1688 was the coup, the Inglorious Revolution, and then the formal instantiation of the enslavement of the English-speaking peoples was 1694 with the establishment of the Bank of England.
Right,
which was the holding company for all British assets. And that holding company has funneled and channeled all that wealth and power, et cetera, to continental Europe since 1694.
Right, okay. And then I believe that the Bank of England is in a really, really bad state currently.
Well, we've been, I'm going to put a little thing out there, and this is just a supposition on my part.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Donald Trump's, this gets to your statement, okay? I think Donald Trump's tweet of last week or so that said unconditional surrender, I think he was pointing that at Amsterdam. I think he was pointing that at The Hague.
Oh, this is interesting. Oh, this is,
because that's
you are far too interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For all those that are listening, whenever I've recorded with EM, it's only been twice now. This is the third time. The conversations have always gone on longer than I'd scheduled for. And I warned him privately by email and a DM, by email, that, look, we've only got up to an hour. And then towards the end, he throws this in. Yeah, so I got my
Where is Trump today?
He's in the Hague. He's in the Netherlands.
So this gets back to your statement about the Bank of England. The Bank of England is the holding company for the Dutch East India Company, the successor to, and the Commonwealth headquarters for the Dutch East India Company. And we've been at war with them for, open war, for, recognizing finally that we have to throw off this, orange, the Dutch. It's funny that we have Orange Man here doing it. That's just like poetic justice, yes. Right? From New Amsterdam. Yeah. We've been, so how do you can't fight a woman head on because everybody will come to her defense. You're fighting a woman or an estrogen. So what do you got to do? You got to impoverish her. It's the only thing she'll listen to. Right? And you got to do it carefully. And she's got assets and resources all over the world. We just burned, what did we do in the Ukraine? We just burned all of NATO's warfighting capacities and highlighted all their intelligence, the Praetorian Guard's intelligence operations and capabilities. What did we just do with Israel and Iran? We just did the same. We just burned all of their war. We pretty much in about 12 days burned through all their warfighting capacities there. It's not completely gone. They might be able to go on for about another year. And we just highlighted all their intelligence. They just used all their, intelligence operations capabilities against Hezbollah, and now against Iran and the IRGC. Well, that's all burnt now. It takes years to build those kinds of things, and it takes a lot of money, and they don't have the money anymore. And people who have been infiltrated like that don't get infiltrated that easily again. So we burnt all of that. Okay. Where's one last portion of the world that we got to burn that clandestine covert operations and warfighting, World War III kind of capabilities out? China, India, Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
We got it. So when you are engaged against estrogen-based warfare, you have to move exceedingly carefully, and you have to steadily impoverish, and you have to remove the other parties' capacities to fight in covert and clandestine kinds of ways, manipulative, controlling kinds of ways, and you have to do it by calling them out and drawing them out. Well, we've been steadily margin calling the Bank of England for the last 5 years. That's what Powell's been doing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and I'm very familiar. Just to let other people know that one of the first guests I had when I took over hosting this X Space was Tom Luongo, and I'm very familiar with his thesis, which marries yours, that what Trump is doing is out to get the United States out from under the control of the City of London, and that certainly has been going on in the financial markets, where the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates to draw money out of Europe and the UK, and also they've set up SOFR and retired LIBOR, so that the US now has control over the price of the dollar, whereas before, who controlled the price of the dollar was the City of London and the Europeans.
The only Brexit so far that's been successful so far, and we don't know ultimately how it's going to go, is the United States. That was a Brexit, 2016. Right, and everything that's happened since. Now, and this is just me, and I don't know how this plays out, and we have to do it very carefully because the United Kingdom is riddled right through with these parasites, right? I don't believe that we're going to let the homeland of our people fall. We can't. It's too much of a threat in the world. But a whole lot of humbling and a whole lot of bankrupting and a whole lot of drawing out intelligence, MI6 and MI5 and everything else, and highlighting how ludicrous and retarded and malevolent government is in the United Kingdom. It's all got to happen before we finally move. And bankrupting the Bank of England, which is a holding company and not really a bank, is primary to that.
Yep. Well, I can see that happening. That is definitely happening. And I think the term benevolent doesn't say it all, how evil and disgusting and deceitful and duplicitous the current British government is.
It's estrogen.
And just for people...
estrogen wages war in a very manipulative deceit. What does estrogen do? It doesn't have the physicality, so it has to fight you in all these clever ways. And primary to that is warping of constant warping of reality, while steadily upping the attacks and the abuse and gaslighting you.
Yep.
That's the UK government writ large.
Just as an example of that, for people not familiar, and this is something that personally I'm appalled by. I cannot believe that they've done this, but the government has pretty much made it decriminalized full-term abortion. So a woman can have an abortion in the very last day of her pregnancy. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's infanticide.
It's child sacrifice.
Yeah. Oh, there's another way of looking at it.
It's child sacrifice.
But that's how
so
evil.
Yeah. It's child sacrifice. So, this is a complete aside, but something I've been working on as I'm writing the novel and thinking through. I have a wonderful teen daughter that I'm raising and watching, and human psychology, deep-rooted human psychology doesn't change. It changes very slowly across time. millions,
Yeah.
of, thousands, if not millions of years, tens of thousands, if not millions of years. And most women have been conditioned across millennia for the sacrifice of their children, either in raiding season, send them off to wars, tribal wars, etc. When you take that, you civilize society and reduce that dramatically, that wiring, though, in there to sacrifice their children is still there. Women and weaker men. I don't want to put this all on women, right? Because the weaker men don't necessarily sacrifice; they predate on. And when you remove strong princes and strong testosterone, masculine men, there's no shield there to prevent that anymore.
Yep. Okay. Well, Ian, it's been fascinating talking to you as ever. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
So Twitter is probably best. Ian Burlingame at Twitter. I'm taking a break somewhat through the summer. I just took a week break because I've got family and business, and I need to replenish my dopamine systems. But I'll be on every couple of days or so to keep up with things. I am still publishing on Substack, emburlingame.substack.com, and other than that, they can reach out to you, of course, Rich. If they've got big questions and ideas, you've got lots of answers, or folks who can get them answers. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been an absolute delight and an education talking to you once again, and I look forward to having you on my channel again at some point.
Well,
because I'm learning so much, and I think one of the things that's really important for us all to do, for everybody here listening and for our friends and our family, we have to, I don't know what the right term is, we have to start seeing through the lies. We've been lied to about so much. We've been lied to about how currency and money works. We've been lied to about gold and silver and Bitcoin. They've been telling us that they're not valuable while they've been stealing it. So what we have to do is to educate ourselves, inform ourselves and inform others, and keep abreast of what's happening in the world. And one way of keeping abreast of what's happening in the world of crypto is with thecoinrepublic.com. Really, really appreciate this. Thank you, EM, and thank you, The Coin Republic. This is Crypto Rich signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.